The statement has obviously reflected the serious nature of the economy that we currently find ourselves in. So tough decisions have had to be taken. The government has been very straight about that, the decisions that they've had to take. One hopes that it won't be the 6 years or longer when you start to see growth again in the economy, when you start to see inflation come down. Obviously, the decisions that have been taken in order to ensure that that happens quickly, in order that you then see growth ahead of the next election. This was something that happened back in 2010 when the government first came in. They had to deal with the economic turmoil of 2008. The Conservatives and, to be fair, the Lib Dems in a coalition government got to grips with the public finances that restored confidence in the markets, and the Conservatives were rewarded with the general election in 2015, and that is the hope that if the Conservative government can reassure the markets, as it has done under this budget, if it can get public spending under control, if it can see that growth or the upshoots of growth in the next couple of years, then it may have a chance of going on to win the next general election.
Well, Charlie, it's fair to say there's been a fairly lukewarm response from Conservative voters to this. Higher taxes for the middle earners, rises for those on benefits. It doesn't feel like a particularly Conservative budget, would you say?
Well, I think it's a compassionate Conservative budget. It's a budget that reflects the nature of of the reality of the situation that we're currently in. And that means at a time where people are seeing their energy bills rise, that there is an energy price guarantee, when we're seeing people who are the most vulnerable in society, so that is pensioners on the top end, and lower earners. Those groups of people are seeing their pensions and their benefits protected. They are going to rise in line with inflation, not wages, which is the higher, to protect those important groups. Now, that does mean that you need to raise money from somewhere in order to deal with those difficult decisions and the challenges that we face, and that does mean that those of working-age people are going to be hit slightly harder. But that is just a reflection of the reality of the situation that we're in after seeing huge spending on the back of COVID, on Russia's war in Ukraine, and global inflation.
Yeah, I tell you what I took away from it. An awful lot of the things that he's planning are going to happen after 2024, which is after the next general election. Is this an indication that the government actually thinks that it's just going to sort of tread water for the next 2 years and hopefully keep things under control and actually leave the next government, whether it's Labour or Conservative, to actually pick up the pieces?
Well, I think it's a long-term plan, and I think that's what's reassured the markets, and I think that's what's reassured...
Yeah, but long-term could mean actually handing all the problems over to a Labour government, couldn't it?
Well, that's not something I want to see, and I think if you're a Conservative supporter, you want to see the Conservatives who are traditionally in office to deal with these difficult decisions, particularly when it comes to the economy. And so I think what we want to see is not just protecting the most vulnerable people, as I've said, but there is investment in education, in the NHS, in infrastructure projects which will help the economy grow. But, as you say, there will be some difficult decisions that bite in a couple of years' time. But it's giving people the assurances now of what is coming, and you can only be straight with the public. And that is the problem that we had under the mini-budget under Kwasi and Liz Truss.
Well, it's fair to say it hasn't landed particularly well with the pollsters. Conservative voters haven't responded that favourably. We haven't really seen a budgetary bounce. Are you expecting things to pick up, or is it starting to feel inevitable now that it might be a handover to Keir Starmer?
I don't think so, because polls are important. They're a snapshot of any one given point in time. But the one poll that I think, as a Conservative, you'd want to take comfort from is the fact that Rishi Sunak has, when asked the question, who do you think would be the best Prime Minister, Rishi is ahead of Sir Keir Starmer. And I think that just reflects the situation that we're in, whereby you've got a Prime Minister who was the former Chancellor, that's had to take difficult decisions through COVID, that is now leading the country, and where people do have confidence that he's the man that can continue to lead the country through those difficult times versus Sir Keir Starmer.
I think it's quite interesting, though, that our Prime Minister was the former Chancellor, and in the papers today saying that he's got this sort of bromance going with Gordon Brown, which I found really interesting. I mean, do we think that Rishi Sunak, our Conservative Prime Minister, former Chancellor, is actually listening to, what was it? I'm just trying to remember the terminology that Gordon Brown always used to use, that it was to be prudent.
Yeah.
Yes. So do we think we're going to get some of Gordon Brown's prudency built into the Exchequer over the next 2 years?
Well, I think we're just going to see a Conservative government that manages the economy as it traditionally does, where we're seeing employment at its highest and unemployment at its lowest since the 1970s. That's obviously something we want to maintain. It's a budget that is compassionate, so as I said before, investing in education and
well, the middle
health
classes
service.
won't see it as being
No, they won't,
compassionate,
no.
of course, will they? They will see it, you know, if it's going to cost them 20,000 over the next, 6 years, is it, 4 years, or whatever it is they're saying, that it's going to... They are the ones who are actually going to have to actually pick up the slack here, aren't they?
But I think people recognise that after huge investment that had to take place during COVID, we can't forget that. That's, you know, the reality of the situation that we're in is because of things like COVID and because of the war in Ukraine. So people understand that the money has to come from somewhere. This isn't a Labour budget where there's a magic money tree or a unicorn you can just sort of shake, or a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. This is a budget that is a Conservative budget which recognises that the money has to come from somewhere. And I think if you're straight with the public about those challenges, and if you're straight with the public about where the money needs to come from, people do recognise and understand, and are more likely to give you their support than be led down the garden path where they would otherwise be very disappointed in the future.
I love your optimistic attitude. I really do.